I'm Dax Hansen. I'm a partner with Perkins Coie. Perkins Coie is a 1,200 lawyer national law firm with offices in Asia as well. And I'm the founder of the blockchain, the fintech practice. I've been at crypto in various forms since 2010. And so I'm here, I think, to provide a little bit of the historical context, at least one vantage point as well in this dialogue. So really the question is, how's the legal landscape different from 2017 to 2021? And I guess first of all, I'll show you, this is a picture of me and a couple of other lawyers at the Nifty conference in Hong Kong in 2018, summer of 2018, which I think was at least heralded as the very first conference on NFTs. So I can say that I was approached by clients about NFTs in 2017, but really my first foray into NFTs was in summer of 2018 when I went to Hong Kong and jumped on a panel. That's Andy Beal and Payum, and then my partner Kyle Wood, and that's me on my left here. And then there's a picture of the conference. And I guess what I'd say is that some things stay the same. I'd say that the vibe at this conference is very similar to the vibe at the Hong Kong conference 2018, and I think the focus on gaming and content, it's all pretty consistent, and I think that this community has stayed pretty consistent in what they're trying to do. And so, what's changed? Well, I guess, a couple of very important things have changed. One is, hopefully I've lost a little bit of weight since 2018. The legal landscape in blockchain and crypto has gotten very sophisticated since then. That we have, with digital assets, cryptocurrencies, we have a whole body of law that's been developed, either through legislation at the federal and state level, or through regulatory interpretations and guidance from agencies, and a lot of it by enforcement action. So we've gotten the law by enforcement rather than with development of new laws. But even this week, for instance, we've had some papers released by the President's Working Group on stablecoins, for instance, calling for additional powers and for Congress to act to regulate the space. And so we have in the broader crypto landscape a significant amount of law. And part of the question is, how does that apply here to NFTs? I guess the third thing that's changed is that we now have mainstream adoption, or at least mainstream awareness of NFTs. And I just pulled just a few headlines here to show that these are mainstream publications like Forbes and Wall Street Journal that are talking about mainstream companies like the NFL, and Dapper Labs and others doing deals around NFTs. We have a lot of artists coming into space, large dollar amounts, which attracts, of course, a lot of attention. And we have a focus on things like the metaverse and Web3, where I think if there's anything that I've taken away from this conference today is that the metaverse is really going to be powered by NFTs. And so, not only have things changed, but they're going to change. I think they're going to change pretty rapidly, just given the significance of the technology, the power of the technology to play a role in our everyday digital lives, where we're seeing a blurring of the digital and physical. So with those changes, including mainstream adoption, mainstream awareness, just for instance, the NBA and the NFL fans, to the tunes of hundreds of millions of fans at Major League Soccer and others, those fans are becoming familiar with digital collectibles in the NFT space. And I think that they start going down the rabbit hole into mainstream digital assets as well through that entry point. But the reality is that we have larger players, institutional players coming in, including bringing their intellectual property, their assets, and their brands to bear in this space. So what I thought I would spend most of my time on here today is just giving you a little bit of a background on, my punch list of issues. If you're going to work through issues, lots of great content here today, just one lawyer's perspective, but at least I've been fortunate to be involved in some of the higher profile NFT projects. And so this was my list when I sat down just to think, well, what would you run through, what would you consider? And so the first one is just to figure out, first of all, how to stay out of a regulated box. You heard on the last panel that there's a lot of regulation, and it's true, it can ruin your day, it can ruin your life. So I think this is more about an exercise of keeping out of a box, keeping out of a regular box, and don't let the things that sort of brought down token sales and ICOs invade this space. And I'll say that you guys seem to have, this community seems to have a pretty consistent vibe on collectibles, on content, on artists, taking care of artists, a lot of creation, which I think is very consistent with something that shouldn't be regulated as either a money form or as an investment type. But to the extent you bring things like money or investments into the picture, then they're going to be regulated and you have to sort through that issue. It's also the case that NFTs are just so flexible that it can be a piece of art, it can be a security, it could be a money, you could have some sort of a promissory note, it can be a digital identity. So work through what the underlying regulatory characterization is, separate and apart from the token that references it. Second of all, to say that I haven't seen a commercial agreement yet in this space that governs the relationship with the parties that doesn't need to be reworked. So work it through, get some help sorting that through. And then I think one just needs to reconcile the fact that we're dealing with a product that's intended to be a perpetual license access or perpetual rights to access some sort of content, for instance. But when you're dealing with some mainstream content and brand owners, they're very much dealing with a licensed distribution model where there's all sorts of rights clearance issues. And so you just need to work through those issues. I think that you can certainly sell something perpetually, sign all the rights away, but that's not where a lot of the larger institutions are going to be. That's not their mindset. So just reconcile the difference in the expectations of the technology with the underlying content itself. All blockchains are not made the same. Some are closed loop, some are open loop, some can store more on chain, some can't, some you can only accept certain types of payments in. Work through the specific blockchain limitations for the use case. And then I say consider on-chain and off-chain storage, but really what I meant by that is more whether you're going to have centralized or decentralized storage of the asset that's referenced in the metadata. Because if it's something that is like a crown jewel of some brand, for instance, they may not want it to be out there indefinitely, right? And so that's not necessarily a bad thing, but we have to just recognize that we might need to take a baby step from a centralized environment to a decentralized environment, and it's not one size fits all. We had a lot of conversation earlier today about this. Well, what are we selling? And one thing that hasn't changed since 2018 Nifty conference is like who owns what. It's the intellectual property issues. Just being clear about it. And I think a lot of the things that have been sold have been quiet. They've been quiet about well, what are we selling and what are the rights that are associated with it, and that can lead to some problems because the gap filling, I guess, default rule is that it's going to be a copyrighted work that somebody can sell freely. But if you think about a lot of software that's licensed, it's subject to certain limitations, and there can be restrictions imposed on use and further transfer and things like commercializing commercial use. And so that just needs to be specified. Same thing with trademarks. And then, all of those details need to be put into some sort of terms. They can be short and sweet, but they need to be some sort of document with a license or some sort of other clarifications or restrictions. And those documents, those legal documents, often just need to be hardwired into the smart contract itself. There's not a place currently in the metadata for a license, but it can be inserted in there, so there can be some reference. And then you have to think through, well, how do you future-proof these terms, these contracts? How do they become binding on future takers or buyers of the NFTs? There's actually some really complicated contract issues in there to think through, but they can be solved. And then, of course, you've got sort of the battle of the agreements in the forums where you've got your own like artist terms, and then you have the platform terms that may be selling you the object or giving you a wallet, for instance, and sometimes those conflict with each other. You've got to sort them through. And of course, if you're selling on with an auction house, you've got those terms to deal with as well. And then sometimes those platforms are in an international location where the content owner is in a different jurisdiction, and so you've got to sort through things like enforcement of violations of intellectual property. And then, of course, since we're dealing with traditional crypto in terms of like payment and settlement and clearance, you got to deal with things like anti-money laundering and money transmission and know your customer to sort those things out. And then we heard of things about the tax, but I guess I'll just tip to the wise that if you're the platform selling the NFTs, you're in the best position to be collecting the tax. And so just sort of allocating the responsibility between the creator and the platform is something that should be discussed, and it's an early space where a lot of those platforms haven't addressed the state or the international tax issues. And of course, there are going to be more issues, but I think this is a good general punch list to work through the issues. So anyway, that's one perspective. Thanks for having me. Good to see you. Take care.